It's a real pleasure to introduce Leanne Hinton and the topic for her presentation, of which I'll let her speak to, and it's in your program. And we really look forward to her presentation. And after that, we'll have a break. And then we're going to have the panel of Joe Hotch, Selena Everson, Marcia Hotch, Leanne will rejoin them, Dick and Nora Downhauer, Ethel Makinen, and Lance Twitchell will moderate that particular panel. But please give a very warm welcome to Leanne Hinton.
Thank you for the warm introduction. I want to thank a lot of people here, myself, the clans whose land this is. Thank you for having us here. I want to thank Marcia again, who was instrumental in inviting me. The people at AICLS, who I visited yesterday all too briefly, and especially the people at the Gold Belt Heritage Foundation who've been hosting me for the last 2 days. And I've been learning so much about all the work that they're doing and AICLS in language revitalization. There's so much work going on here by so many people and so many organizations. And the wonderful hand warming last night warmed my hands and my heart. And finally, I just wanted to thank David, who warmed my hands and my heart again just before the conference began this morning. So for everything, Gunach Chish, Gunach Chish. So Marcia had asked me to talk about a group that I belong to called the Advocates for Indigenous California Language Survival. And wanted to start out by showing you a map that includes California, and it's this multicolored area here. Each one of those colors represents a different language family. There's more native languages in California than in any comparably sized area in the Western Hemisphere. And this kind of illustrates that. This is another map showing the California Indian tribal groups, just showed by language rather than by language family. But I want you especially to look at this map to the extent that you can see it, which has, besides the language names, it has the numbers of speakers. This map is something that I developed 20 years ago. I asked everybody I knew in tribes and linguists working with them how many native speakers they thought were left. And I don't know whether you can see the numbers, but the numbers on this map had a lot of zeros. There are at least 30 languages, there were 20 years ago, 30 languages that had no speakers left at all. And the rest of them, almost all of them, had less than 10 living speakers. That map is 20 years old, and a lot has changed since then. So there's a lot fewer people that were born into the language than there were 20 years ago. And many of those languages that had fewer than 10 speakers have fewer than 5 now, or maybe none. And some of those languages that had more than 10, the few languages that had more than 10, now have less than 10. And it's in this context, 21 years ago, that the Advocates for Indigenous California Language Survival was formed. This is just our website here, Facebook page. We're into modern technology as well. I'll just say a little bit about the development of the advocates. So, about 21 years ago, there was an organization called Native California Network, and they developed a conference. They wanted to have a conference, and I was part of that conference, and so we're close to 100 California Indians that were working on their languages, or were interested in their languages, or wanted their languages. And Native California Network asked them, what could an organization do to help people that are trying to bring their languages back? And it was actually a very historic conference, because it was the first time that people from all over California got together and got to know each other in terms of other people that were in the same state and had the same wishes and the same heartfelt need to bring their languages back, or to learn their languages. And so it was an amazing conference in that way. And out of that conference was the formation of the Advocates for Indigenous California Language Survival. We call it AICLS for short, or the Advocates. And we were formed as a committee of the Native California Network. Well, a few years later, Native California Network closed its doors, but the Advocates remained. And first we functioned under the umbrella of other nonprofit organizations, and then finally we became an independent nonprofit. This is the mission statement that was formed: to foster the restoration and revival of Indigenous California languages so that they may be retained as a permanent part of the living cultures of Native California. And we run several programs. One of them is the Master-Apprentice language learning program. Another is the Breath of Life workshop that was especially designed for those languages that had no speakers. Our biennial conferences, of which that 1992 conference was the first. We have a little program that I won't say anything more about called Seeds of Language mini grants that gives grants of up to $500 to individuals who have some language project that this would help. And then I'll say a few words at the end on language revitalization for families. I think even before I started, it was getting close to break time, so I'll try to talk as fast as I can, and maybe we'll have a late break if you don't mind. This is our current board, and I'd just like to acknowledge them. This is Stan Rodriguez, he's Kumeyaay, and Richard Bugby, who is Luiseño, and they represent the southern part of California. Let's see, this is Carly Tex, she's Western Mono. And in the back here is Matthew Vestuto, who is Ventureño Chumash, and this is, sorry, I get so, I have anomia. This is Deborah Murillo, who is Obispeño Chumash, and this is Vince Medina, who is Mutsun Aloni. And those four people represent the middle part of California. And then back here is Julian Lang, who you'll hear a fair amount about. This is Kayla Carpenter. Julian Lang is Karuk. Julie Carpenter is Hupa. And Nancy Steele is Yurok and Karuk. And they represent Northern California. So our board is representing the whole state of California. I know this might be boring, just want to say Richard Bugby is our chair. I function as an advisory board of one. Marina Drummer, whose picture is here, is our administrator, without whom we would not be able to survive. She is our grant writer and financial officer, and she's the one that gets the checks out to Master-Apprentice teams and makes sure that we are organizing our conferences and so on. And we're totally on soft funding. There's no endowment, no regular income. We are funded by foundations, by individual donors, and to a growing extent by the tribes themselves, especially the gaming tribes who actually are getting enough money to be generous. All our programs are for pretty much for adults, with a couple of exceptions. And so people often ask us, why aren't you dealing more with the children? Because the children are the great language learners, and we want our kids to learn as children. And certainly all of us see Hawaii as a major model for language revitalization. And they deal with children. They began with preschool, and when they were starting their language nests, after a couple of years they started a kindergarten, and then they started first grade, and each year all the way till 12th grade. They've had a generation now of new speakers coming out of this program. But there's a few things that Hawaii has that the mainland doesn't. One of them is they have only one language. And they have a university that can focus entirely on that language. They even have a legislature that's made Hawaiian one of the 2 official languages of the state. So, and they have a lot more human resources than any of the languages of California. It is still true, though, that almost all of their teachers are second language learners. And they learned primarily through an intensive university program. Now, looking back at California, the very language diversity that's California makes it really impossible for universities to give intensive programs. There's not enough speakers, there's not enough teachers, there's not enough experts, there's just not enough students. So what we're working with is the same problem that any language or language group works with, is the missing generation of speakers, the professional age people who know the language and can teach it. So for many languages, the current activists are these young to middle-aged adults who did not learn their language. They are on the shoulders of previous generations of activists, but they are to the point now where the professional age people and the main people that are running organizations and teaching in the classrooms today are second language learners. They did not learn their language as children. They had the passion and the fire to have it, and they want their children to learn it. So how can the missing generation learn the language? So when we were first formed in 1992, Julian Lang, he did not come to that meeting, but he saw me before the meeting, and he said, I'm not going to that meeting, but I know what we really need. He said, look at Karuk, my language. He said, we have 100 speakers now. Or we had 100 speakers 10 years ago. We're down to about 15 or 20 now. He said, and in 20 years, our language will be gone. But if every speaker would take on one person and make it his responsibility to teach that younger person the language, then our language would survive for another 50 years. And if each one of those people then takes it on as his responsibility to teach one or more people their language, then it'll survive forever. So at the meeting, we talked about that idea, and that was the founding of our Master-Apprentice language program. The native speakers, okay, there's no university. that can teach the language, but the native speakers can. They have the knowledge of the language more than can ever be documented. To learn from them if one knows how and has the dedication is more valuable than grammars, dictionaries, or written lessons. Learning through the interaction with those speakers is the most natural and most effective way of learning a language. And they also have the vast cultural knowledge, storytelling, music, ceremony, kinship, and genealogy, and history of the people, how to live with the land, how to be a Karuk or a Kumeyaay or a Tlingit. Now, I'm not saying that these other ways of learning, such as through the grammars and through the dictionaries, is to be thrown away, because it's not. And in fact, all the learners I know who are really talented learners have learned every way that's possible. I've been talking to Ishmael a little bit and to Lance a little bit. These are people who have learned by reading everything there is to read on Tlingit and following the native speakers around all the time. And so we figured, well, this is what we need to do for the Master-Apprentice program. And actually, we don't have, most of the languages of California don't even have official writing systems yet. And that's really one of the reasons that we don't use writing or grammar books, because there aren't any. And what we had to do at the very beginning is to talk to those people who were saying, well, I can't learn our language because we don't even have a writing system. And we had to say, you don't need a writing system. Why don't you try to learn it the way babies learn their first language? Learn it by following the elders around. Now, what's happened with, I don't want to get ahead of myself too much, but what's happened with the Master-Apprentice program is that many of the learners have gotten to a certain point, and then they said, you know, I really want a linguist who to talk to me about some of these points that I just can't get. And so there's been a lot of programs going on where some of the linguists from Berkeley and elsewhere have started working with the advanced advanced apprentices. Anyway, so we have a Master-Apprentice program in California. We've trained somewhere, I haven't counted lately, but somewhere around 150 teams from about 40 different languages in California alone. And as you'll see, it's also spread past California to other places. And in fact, I think there's a program starting up here at Alaska. This is the manual that we wrote called How to Keep Your Language Alive. On the cover is Elise Pahan, who was a previous apprentice. She's now in her 30s, but this is her as about a 16-year-old with her mother. But Ellie's master speaker was her great aunt Violet Super. Now, the goals and expectations of language learning for language reclamation are really different from the goals and expectations of other learners. That is that the learner will become orally proficient. And the learner will not only learn the language, but learn to use the language in daily life. And the learner will also carry on the heritage cultural traditions and be the one to pass on the language to the next generation by necessity. And the learner is and will be a language activist. So the principles of the Master-Apprentice program are, first of all, just leave English behind. And I'll talk about each of these just a little bit. Make yourself understood through nonverbal communication. And by nonverbal communication, we mean activities that you're doing, so the context of what you're doing, as well as gestures and pictures and whatever you're using that is outside the language but makes the language be understood. The focus is on oral learning. The apprentice, this is, in my mind, one of the most important principles, that the apprentice is a proactive learner. There's a method that some people have been interested in lately called Where Are Your Keys? And they talk about learners as being language hunters. So we borrowed that term too, that the apprentice is a language hunter. And you learn through activities. And you learn language that you can use, and you use what you learn. So we give 2 trainings a year. Here's just a couple of exercises I wanted to mention that we give a whole lot of exercise during the first 2-day training, and then we follow up with every 6 months another training. There's also mentors that call and visit the teams and help them through tough spots. But mostly they're on their own. And so in our training, we're trying to teach them how do you make yourself understood, for example, without, if the apprentice doesn't know the language and neither of you want to use English. And so this is an icebreaker exercise we use where we pass out little cards and each person gets a card in English that he doesn't show to anybody else. And then his task is to go around the room in the training and make somebody do the activity on the card without using any English. And this would be somebody who may not even know the other language yet. So get someone to bring you a cup of coffee, or get someone to give you $1. That's the hardest one to get to happen. Get someone to tie another person's shoelaces together, or get someone to sit on someone else's lap. These are the kinds of things that are on those cards, and so people learn that they can communicate their needs without using any language if needed. We also have various exercises for practicing immersion, and one of my favorite ones is using wordless books. These are usually children's books, although there's some pretty adult ones too, where the whole story is told entirely in pictures. I have a collection now of about 60 of those books. And this is just an example. This one is called The Chicken Thief. And so it starts out with, it's sort of fuzzy, isn't it? Starts out with bear and rabbit that live in a house together, and they have a bunch of chickens. And then a fox comes along and steals one of the chickens. And then most of the story is about the chasing the fox and the chicken, and then the final outcome, which I will not spoil for you. You can read it yourself. But this is a very helpful exercise for the speakers, because they feel comfortable staying in the language when they know that the person they're talking to can understand more or less what they're saying, and through the pictures in this case. And it's very comfortable for the learner too, because it's a nice, comfortable first immersion exercise for people to do. Then I said that this is one of the most important things. And when I was talking today to Lance, and I actually asked the same question to Ishmael today, I asked them, how did you learn your language? And they said, well, we learned it by doing everything. We read, we tuned out other things in our lives. We made it our top priority. And we just went after language any place we could get it, and we followed the elders around all the time. And so that's what we want the learners in the Master-Apprentice program to do, is to make language their top priority and to follow their elders around all the time. And so the very first thing they have to do in the training is learn how to ask questions in the language. And these are not to be thought of as questions that would be translated literally, but what, for example, is a polite way to say in your language to hold up something and ask what it is? Or if you're looking at one of those wordless books or at pictures, how can you ask, what is he doing? Some of our apprentices would do things like, one said, okay, well, we really like to play cards together. And so I would shuffle the cards, he'd say, and I would ask, what am I doing? You know, and I would deal the cards and say, what am I doing? And so that's a powerful question, because unlike what is this, which just elicits a word, what am I doing or what is he doing elicits a sentence. It elicits grammar. We also have questions that people need to learn during activities. So if people are doing something like making potatoes together, cooking potatoes together, and the apprentice might want the speaker to bring language into it. And so he could ask, well, tell me, or he could request, tell me what to do, or ask, what do I do next? And then there's survival questions, like say it again, say it slower. You need some kind of panic question too. And where are your keys? They actually break into English. Their panic statement is, how fascinating! And then they go right back into the language. And then there's ways to keep each other in the language, or to remind each other to speak in the language. So learning to say things like, say that in our language, or let's talk in our language. Teaching and learning through activities. This is in the training, this is a brainstorming session. We ask people, what are some things you do every day? And they start making lists of that we write down on the board of okay, we get up in the morning, we ask each other what we dreamed, we cook breakfast, so on. And then we ask, what are some traditional activities that you do or want to do? And so there's basket making, or there's ceremonial preparation, making regalia, singing, and so on. It's going to be different activities for different teams, depending on their interests and what they know that they can transmit to each other, and what they want. So this is a Kachan team that sings together a lot. This one is this again is just an exercise we sometimes do where they're doing puppet making. And in fact, this team utilized puppet making after this finger puppet making and hand puppet making out of felt and so on. And they're supposed to be talking and are talking in their language while they're doing it. This team actually now does puppet shows. So they really became interested in it. This is a team that we trained up in Nunavut, or a set of teams that we trained up in Nunavut, and they did square dancing. They loved square dancing. And during the training, they remembered, there used to be Inuinnaqtun words for all the square dance instructions. They've been doing it in English for years. So they got back into doing the square dance instructions in the Inuinnaqtun language. This is the first and only, so far, European language that we've done training for. This is Gaelic in Nova Scotia. So I went there and trained a group of people doing Gaelic. They're deep, deep into music, so this is them singing milling songs in Gaelic. So there's all different flavors of Master-Apprentice programs. Some of them are like the California one. The First Peoples Cultural Council in British Columbia has a multilingual program like ours. There's single language programs run by specific tribes that we've done a lot of training for. A lot of MAP programs are related to immersion schools elsewhere in the United States for increasing the teacher fluency. And there's family-based programs, which I'll talk about in a bit, where elders work with the whole family. So there's all these different flavors. And some groups have modified that manual that I showed you to fit their own needs. The Sauk and Fox tribe in Oklahoma has written their own manual, or a supplement, and the First Peoples has written their own manual. And our manual's been translated into Portuguese for Brazil for distribution to the tribes there. We've trained all over. This is, again, Nunavut, Canada. Another thing that a lot of people are interested in there is string figures. And so there was a lot of instruction going on in Inuinnaq to invite speakers to the apprentices on how to do these string figures. And we trained last year in Australia. This is Stan and Nancy and me, and we were brought by the staff of the Resource Network for Language Diversity. What they wanted to do is they wanted to train trainers, wanted us to train trainers. And so we ran 2 large workshops for a total of 30 different languages, training the people who would then become trainers for Master-Apprentice teams throughout Australia. This is a ceremony that they honored us with, taking us to one of their sacred places and giving us a welcome to their country. Some of the other exercises that we do in trainings, this one in Australia was a language line, where each pair of people here is speaking a different language, but in order people were scared to speak. They were scared of making mistakes, so we just lined them up and said, all right, now for 5 minutes, you're going to talk to each other in your language, and it's all going on at the same time, so they didn't have to feel like everybody was watching them and listening to them. And they were amazed. And then we did it for 10 minutes, and then we did it for 15 minutes, and I didn't think we could talk that long in our language, but they did. Another thing that a lot of people have problems with is new words. Whether people should make new words or not, who has the authority to make new words. And that came up a lot in Australia. And so we decided to do an exercise where we said, don't make up new words. And we're not talking about new words here. But if you're going to talk, if you're going to use your language in modern times, if you don't have a word for something, can you describe it? Can you think of a descriptive phrase? Which actually is how a lot of languages make up new words in the first place. But if you don't call it new words, it's okay. And so everybody was fine about making up words for descriptive phrases, that is, for deodorant and all of these toiletries that we brought in. Stan, by the way, is one of the best teachers I know, and he was an apprentice in the Master-Apprentice program. Very strong second language speaker. This is some of the Karuk teams. This is a new team of the oldest speaker is Lucille Albers, and she's working with her niece Tamara Alexander. This is Julian Lang again, who learned his language all his adult life, and he's the one that I mentioned that actually inspired the Master-Apprentice program. He is a teacher of the language, and he also ended up being the second master for both of these women after their masters passed away. So this is Nancy, who is one of the board members, one of the founding board members. This is her niece. Nancy is a teacher and a trainer. Her niece, Crystal Richardson, is now a mentor for the teens of the North, who mentors them and helps them with their problems and encourages them and films them and assesses them and so on. And she also is using her language with her baby niece, and who lives with her and her family. And so she's making it her priority to spend several hours a day in the language with her baby niece. This team, I'm just showing you teams and what they do now. They all are teachers. They're all teachers of other people, either in the classroom or in their families. So this is Luther Gerardo. This is Kawaisu team. His daughter was his first apprentice, and his daughter has founded the Kawaiisu Cultural Foundation now, which has sponsored other Master-Apprentice teams, and she's one of the designer of a family language program that's going on right now in Central California. Just two more. This one is Danny Ammon, one of our first apprentices, who now teaches and has for many years Hoopa in the Hoopa language class. This is a 2008 picture that I caught off of his website. And this is Robert Geary, Southeastern Pomo. He grew up with ceremony, but he didn't grow up with language. And so by becoming an apprentice to his aunt, he now has both. He's a ceremonial leader and is able to pray and sing in his language. This is Phil and Ellie Albers. Ellie is the one that was on the cover of the manual, How to Keep Your Language Alive. And she then met Phil, who was deeply, deeply interested in the language but didn't know how to learn it. She taught him what she knew and then gave him over to her master speaker, her great aunt Violet. And so he also became a very strong learner, and they now use the language at home with their children. All of these people are using their languages at home with their children, and they have children. And this, I think, is the most significant movement going on right now. I'll talk about that more in a minute. But what about these languages with no speakers? Well, one of our board members, actually several of our board members, come from languages with no speakers. And this is Elle Frank, one of our founding board members who has cycled off. But she was saying all the time at the beginning, what about us? What are you going to do for us? What are we going to do for us? And so we founded the Breath of Life language workshop for California Indians without speakers. And this is a partnership between UC Berkeley and the advocates. Elle Frank is also an artist, so she often designs the posters for this. And I love this one. It's a coyote with, who's our raven. These are all these pieces of paper with field notes on them and written words, and they're taking off into the air, becoming butterflies, and becoming spoken language again. We're really lucky to have a lot of language activists that are good artists. This is a poster for the recent Breath of Life. He likes to write, this Brian Tripp, he likes to write poems on his pictures. And he says, I'm alone, but not on my own. I hear their voices, their faces I cannot see. They have much to talk about, and they want to speak with me. This is Breath of Life 2012. We take about 60 participants each, every other year. We don't have the energy to do our conferences every year. We do both our main conferences every other year. So there is an enormous amount of information, written information and recorded information in the archives at Berkeley. The Bancroft Library has all the old field notes from the anthropology department when they were doing language back from the late 1800s on through the 1950s. The Hearst Museum has all the old recordings as well as the baskets that people love to visit when they come. The Survey of California and Other Indian Languages in the linguistics department here at Berkeley has the more modern field notes done since the founding of that department in the 1950s. For example, this is a major manuscript by G.P. Harrington on Ohlone, and it's the only Chochenyo Ohlone manuscript in existence. And it's several hundred pages, and so that's the only significant documentation of that language. Since I retired from the university, my successor in running the archive there has done a marvelous job, and one of the things he's done that's so wonderful is taken everything from the archives, both the sound recordings and the written field notes, and got them all digitized, and has created a catalog that points you to all of those digitized items. So you don't necessarily even have to come to Berkeley to access them. Just to show the kinds of languages that come, we don't require that people be without speakers, because for one thing, there's more and more people that are losing their fully native speakers, and everybody can really benefit from the documentation. So this is in 2010, for example, we had 5 Uto-Aztecan languages, 3 Chumash languages, 2 Maidu languages, 2 Miwok languages, 3 Costanoan languages, 5 Pomo languages, 2 other Hokan languages, and 1 Athabascan language and 1 Yokuts language. And so what we do is we familiarize participants with the Berkeley archives and help them find materials on their languages, teach fundamentals of linguistics so they can read the materials, pronounce them, and interpret them, start to understand the grammar, and discuss and demonstrate ways the materials can be utilized for purposes of language learning and revitalization. So, and we give optional workshops, well actually now some of them are required workshops on language learning, language teaching, and they also have to do, they tour the archives, figure out how to find their materials, and they also have to do a project just to focus them in on something, because otherwise they get overwhelmed. And here's just some pictures by our wonderful photographer, Scott Braley, of people working in the archives. Study linguistics. We often have as a guest instructor one of our heroes, Daryl Baldwin, who is Miami Indian from originally from Ohio and Indiana, and now from Oklahoma after the 2 removals that they had. Daryl learned his language entirely from documentation and made it, from the beginning of his learning, he made it part of his family. And he now has 4 fluent speakers among his children, and has gone on to establish a big foundation, and he's done just marvelous things. So he comes sometimes as a guest instructor. We also have mentors that, linguistic mentors in this case, as opposed to speaker mentors, who help people with the linguistic aspects that they have to learn in order to utilize the written and recorded materials. And for the projects, they're just asked, they can do anything they want as a project, but we want it to be something that they can use, something that is either that they can use to teach or that they can use to speak, they can use for themselves to bring the language back into use. And so this group, for example, this is a Obispeño group, and they have come very often. I'm not sure what the project was this year, but I know one year they did, it might have been this year, they did a project on kinship terminology and committed themselves to using their kinship terminology from now on with all their family members. This was just a translation of a song that people could use for games for the children that they would be teaching. This was a demo of an immersion lesson. This was the first conversation to be held in Sierra Miwok in 3 generations. The Moodsons one year did a translation of Green Eggs and Ham by Dr. Seuss. And that now is in the, there's a copy of that now in the Museum of the American Indian. They're very proud to say. And the mentors often develop long-term relationships with the groups that they work with. So this is Natasha Warner, who was, then was a graduate student and now is a full professor at University of Arizona. And she and Karina Luna, who's the main leader in the Moodson Language Revitalization, have been working together for years, ever since the first year they worked at the Master-Apprentice, at the Breath of Life program. And just one final project, just to see the variety. Deborah Miranda is an English teacher in Virginia and a poet, but she is excellent, and she came one year to try to learn something about her Esalen language. And at the end of that week, the 1 week workshop, she wrote a full poem in Esalen. There's not very much material in Esalen, but there's very creative people working on Esalen. Her sister is actually the chairwoman of the Esalen tribe, and her sister has been coming every year, and she has become a storyteller, among other things, in her language. And we had one other person come one year, another Esalen person who was a graduate student at UC Davis, and she was studying rap, and so she wrote for her project a rap in Esalen. So Deborah wrote this absolutely beautiful poem, and she used everything that she could, almost every word that existed in Esalen to write this poem. And I don't have time to go through it, but we dance on the cliff of the world is one line, and that actually was a phrase of a song, of one of the only recorded songs in Esalen. And then at the end she writes, if this poem were a child, then Louise and Ruth would be the midwives. Ruth was her linguistic mentor, and Louise is her sister. And the Breath of Life Conference would be the birthplace, her homeland. So the Breath of Life has spread, like the Master-Apprentice program has. There's a lot of people doing independent Breath of Life workshops now. There's one in Oklahoma every other year. And there was one this last summer for ATNA that they got some money from the Documenting Endangered Languages Fund to run. One of our previous linguistic mentors came up here and helped with the ATNA program. And one that I have more to do with than those is one that's had 2 biennial sessions so far in Washington, D.C. So it's funded by the Documenting Endangered Languages program. And this is our group for 2013. And in the mornings, those linguistics lectures and so on are held at the Museum of the American Indian. And this is, of course, open to everybody in North America. And then in the afternoons, they tour and study at the Library of Congress and National Anthropological Archives. So the last program, other than the conference, which I'll come back to at the end, the last program I want to talk about is Family Language Revitalization. And this isn't really a program yet. We're doing little pilots, and we're just sort of admiring our previous, our past teams that are now using the language in their homes. But I think that using the language in the home is the essence of language revitalization, and it's where things seem to be going now. And so we're trying to figure out how we can help in any way possible. So this is one program that I mentioned before that was founded by one of our past apprentices. It's a Kawaisu extended family that is all working to learn the language together from their elder who is this woman. She's the sister of Gerardo, and she's the mother or grandmother of all these people. And they all live in the same compound. And so they're working together to, domain by domain, to bring their language to the whole family. So here's these little kids that are learning the names for the various place settings at the table. And I edited a book that just came out this year called Bringing Our Languages Home, which is a set of autobiographical accounts by families who are using their languages in their home. And I only wish that I could write another volume immediately, because there's so many other people that are doing this that I've met since this book was committed to press. But I think it's a bunch of very powerful tales by very committed people who are making sure that their children learn the language, in most cases that they did not learn themselves as children. In most cases, they're second language learners. Only in one case in this book do we have native speaker parents who, in fact, did not. They started out like generations before them started out, where they were not speaking the language to their kids until they kind of got the religion and realized, what are we doing? And immediately made it the language of their home. So finally, I just want to get back to the conference, the Languages Life conference that we run biennially, of which that historic 1992, historic for us anyway, 1992 conference was the first. And we usually have it at the beautiful Marin Headlands. It's a very spiritual place. And it's the land of the Coast Miwoks, who come and bless it for us and welcome us every year. This is our group. We're outgrowing the Marin Headlands, unfortunately. We had about 250 people this September at the conference. And Marin claims they can only handle 200, so we had to kind of sneak around. This is the current board giving a welcome. It's also very cold and windy. It's one thing people complain about, but it's one of the only places in our otherwise urban environment that you can have a bonfire. And it was very moving to me and to many people this year, as it has been every year. But I want to especially talk about the Young Women's Panel. This was Carly Tex, who's on our board, one of the new members of our board, and we are so happy to have, we have 4 younger people now who've joined the board recently who, the founders are getting kind of old. We're getting on. And it's just so moving to have another generation coming in who can take on the reins, and really are taking on the reins in a beautiful way. So Carly, as I said, is Mono. She has a master's degree in educational linguistics and has come home to her country to work with her people. Christina Hackes, here in the front, is a former apprentice who now runs the entire language program for her tribe. And this person is especially special in my heart, Kayla Carpenter. Her mother was one of the first 6 apprentices in the Master-Apprentice program 20 years ago. And now Kayla is learning her language and is a graduate student in linguistics at Berkeley. So 21 years ago, actually the theme of the conference was coming of age, because 21 years ago was the first conference. And 21 years ago, that first conference it had many hard moments. There were many people crying over the loss of their language. It was what Nancy calls grief and growl, that people had to go through grief and growl. And In this conference, 21 years later, I wanted to end with this picture because everybody is so excited and nobody's talking about their language dying anymore. David was saying something yesterday about don't talk about the language dying anymore, talk about it coming back. And that's what everybody feels at these conferences. The languages are coming back. Still, I want to end with one last quote from Julian Lang at that September conference we just ran. I tried to write it down because he was really talking eloquently. And he said, that whole book is closing. The book of our elders, our first speakers, they're almost all gone now. It's not a chapter ending, but the whole book that's finished. It's closing. We're starting a new book now. It's about mindfulness. What are we going to put in that book? And I'll end with that. Gunashish.
Thank you, Leanne. Give her another round of applause. As you see by the 2 applauses, that requires you to do triple effort next time. We wanted to make a couple announcements. Excuse me. Fighting off this cold for the past little bit here. But we're going to have a luncheon today, and we still have tickets for sale that can be purchased at lunchtime if you haven't purchased yours already. And so we're going to have Steve Langdon. Are you in the room, Stephen? I know he's here. I've seen him a number of times, but he'll be our featured speaker at that time. And so we look forward to that. And also, we wanted to just take probably about a 5-minute break. We're just going to take a real quick 5-minute break. I know we had something longer, but right now we just want to do a 5-minute break. Joe Hodge, Selena Huberson, Marsha Hodge, Leanne, you'll stay here. Victor Nordanhauer, Ethel McKinnon, and Lance, come forward.